for you, Scott. Take it away.
Very good, very good. So, are we all on the same screen here, unmuted? Because that's perfect. And don't get me wrong, Zoom has been so wonderful throughout this pandemic, but it really is nice to actually be able to have audience interaction. It's very important to me, and I love that about having everybody tonight on and unmuted. So I guess the first thing I'll say is if I had known that Roy Blunt was going to retire or announce his retirement 4 weeks after I declared for U.S. Senate, I would have done it like 30 years ago. So, and oddly enough, I first met him 30 years ago when I was in the Citizen B State finals in Jefferson City, and he was shaking hands, not quite 30 years ago, but getting there. Yeah. He was already in statewide office at that point. I was still a high school senior. So did you all see the president's speech the other night?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Isn't it refreshing to have a president that we can trust to do the job and fight the pandemic? Just such a breath of fresh air. So wonderful. So I was going to ask for a show of hands. There's enough of us that we're unmuted, so that's great. But if did any of you see our lunch video?
No, I'm afraid not.
Well, if you do, and it's on our Facebook page, on our website, you can. It's on YouTube. But if you see it, you'll see that raising hands is actually kind of our thing. It's a theme in the video, and it kind of contrasts with maybe Josh Hawley raising his left fist possibly, but it's sort of a friendly approach to things, like you're getting called on in class and you know the answer. So we can change the narrative of where the state has gone in the last several cycles, and I believe we will. With Blunt now announcing his retirement, this may very well become a bipartisan exercise in keeping Eric Greitens out of the United States Senate. I think the Republicans are going to try awfully hard to keep him from being their nominee. I think there's a chance that they will fail, and that it may be on us to keep that man out of the U.S. Senate. But can you even imagine our U.S. Senate delegation being Josh Hawley and Eric Greitens?
No. Well, I can, but no.
Chris has recently moved from California. Greitens was the governor, and he was in the process of being impeached, and he quit.
Yeah, and I could talk all night about that, but I won't. The real question is, whether it's Greitens or anybody else, and they're falling over themselves to suck up to Donald Trump. The question is who, how, and by advocating for what. So as I think about my story in this whole process, I actually think about the president's speech last week. He talked about the longest walk, which is, he said that the walk up the half flight of stairs when a parent's lost their job to their child's bedroom to say, lost our job and we're going to have to move now. And the president mentioned that his father had to make that walk, and it struck me because my father had to make that walk too. Some of you know the story. I was 15 and growing up in Kansas City. My father had helped try to fend off Carl Icahn's acquisition of TWA. It didn't go so well. He did land on his feet from that, but was out of a job right at the end of the 1980s. As the real estate market collapsed, put the house on the market, it couldn't sell. My parents got caught. They went bankrupt. Lost the home that I'd grown up in, lost the family minivan. And for my mother, it was especially tough because we'd lived there about a decade. And that was actually that was at that time the longest she had ever lived in one place her entire life. She had grown up military. By the time she was 5 years old, she had lived a couple of years in Hawaii and spoke fluent German as well. So she'd been around the world as a child, and that didn't stop after the war. They moved around a lot, although most of her childhood years were spent growing up in Salt Lake City, Utah in the 1950s. So when we lost our home, we landed in rental housing. And a little less than a year after that, the landlord decided they wanted to take back the home. And I came home from school one day to the sight of my mother was in her bedroom sobbing over a notice to vacate. And, you know, President Biden talks about the longest walk for a parent. I have to say that to me kind of felt like the longest walk for a child to see my mother reacting that way. And through that all, we still fared much better than so many families did in that downturn, even in good times since, and in the last one. But the point is, I understand the struggles that working families face. I've been through them. I've lived them. After that, my mother got a job working clothing retail at the Jones store in the Kansas City Northland. My dad became a truck driver, and at the age of 15, I became a waiter and dishwasher and cashier and buffet attendant. Learn how to work on my feet, which turned out to be pretty good training for filibustering in the Missouri Senate, which I had to do an awful lot of. I was lucky enough to get into Truman State University on scholarship, and then into a nationally ranked law school, and landed at one of the larger firms in the state, and made my way back to the middle class. But it took some doing, and ever since then I've wanted to give back. Volunteered, served on the board of the American Lung Association. I had asthma and benefited from their programs as a kid. Worked with the local high school mock trial team as a volunteer attorney coach, and that actually resulted in my getting roped in to running for school board about a year into that, which I did and served for almost a decade. And then, as many of you know, was recruited to run for state house in 2010. Democrats lost 17 seats that day. That was the Obama midterm, and I was able to hold an open seat on a very tough day. And then 2 years later was recruited to run for state senate, and of course defeated an incumbent in a seat that I wouldn't even say it was a 50-50 seat. It was like a 49.5, 48.5. It was a very, very tough district. It had actually flipped to the Republicans in the Obama wave year of 2008 by 36 ballots out of 90,000. And we were, what's that? Yeah, it had gone Republican very narrowly, but in a blue year. And then we were able to flip it back in 12 by less than 1,000 votes. And then in 2016, I survived the Trump wave. And I was unfortunately, the only candidate in Missouri that the Republicans spent $1 million or more against that year that survived. We've had so many good candidates that have had a very tough go of it these last few cycles in Missouri. It's some solace to have won some tough races in a tough place, but I'm convinced that we can do better than what we've seen, and I know that we will. But I think it's important that I've proven my mettle, not just politically, but also in the halls of government, in the Senate. I've proven I will stand and fight for the values that we hold as Democrats. You know that I'm going to fight for a $15 minimum wage in Washington because I raised the minimum wage for cities in Missouri. I got an amendment on that allowed cities a few months to raise the minimum wage if they wanted to. Only one of them did so, the city of St. Louis, but that one development put something like $20 million in the pockets of working families in the city. Everybody else in the state could have done it. Republicans subsequently walked it back and forced the repeal. But the point is, I've proven that I'll make that fight and I can get results, even in the minority in Jeff City. That I'll support policing reforms because I've worked to do it in Jefferson City. when we had a tough vote coming on a gun bill on the last day of session in 2016, I was able to get the Ferguson Commission's recommendation on the officer use of force standard, the Garner v. Tennessee issue, come to a vote that day. I asked for it in caucus, and we got it done, and that Ferguson Commission recommendation has been adopted. I also introduced legislation to rein in our municipal courts. You know that I'll fight for labor organizing, for the PRO Act, because I was the one who went toe-to-toe in the well of the state Senate with Peter Kinder, fighting off the previous question motion on right to work in 2015, and had many other filibusters on labor issues. Same for making sure that Supreme Court justices that we confirm are gonna honor the precedent of Roe v. Wade and Casey v. Pennsylvania, because I have fought the fight for women's reproductive health in Jefferson City, and have done so proudly. Same for LGBT non-discrimination with the SJR 39. I led that filibuster. That was the longest debate in the history of Missouri politics, in the history of Missouri Senate, Missouri government. About almost 40 hours that we held that bill off for. And ultimately, I'm convinced that the time that we bought with that was enough for us to win the war. That bill ultimately did die in the House. It was shoved through the Senate. Same for attacks on workplace discrimination protections. I was one of the last two Democrats standing on that. Same for voting rights, same for green energy infrastructure. I have fought the fight. I've proven I will do it, and I've proven that I'm effective doing it, and that's important. Not just politically, but in terms of governance. You know what you're getting. And most of all, I want to be the senator for Missouri, not just the senator from Missouri who moves to D.C. and permanently relocates there. That's not the goal here. We don't need more of that. We've had too much of that already. What we need is another reliable vote for President Biden's agenda, and that I will be. And speaking of his agenda, it is absolutely inexcusable that the Republicans, all of them, voted against the Rescue Act, an absolutely essential package for working families and seniors and children dealing with this pandemic. Just for political reasons. They were against it because we were for it, and for no other reason, not on the merits, and that's inexcusable, and we need to hold every last one of them accountable for that. I think the key going forward is going to be economic growth, especially coming out of the pandemic. We need better wages to raise a family on. We need stronger organizing and bargaining rights. We need to absolutely end workplace discrimination in every form that it exists. We need affordable higher education. Look, every dollar that somebody pays on student loan debt is a dollar that they don't spend in the economy that doesn't go to economic growth. We can do better than that. We must. And I've fought to keep the lid on student loan interest rates in Jefferson City as well. But this is the time to be bold. We're not going to get the job done being Republican light. And believe me, I am ready. I've been in the minority in Jefferson City for years. I've managed to stop bad things, and I've managed to get good things done despite being outnumbered pretty much more than 2 to 1, sometimes almost 3 to 1 during my tenure there. But I'm ready to be part of a majority that can help move this president's agenda forward. So I'll just conclude as I started. The last 4 cycles have been tough. I know, because I've been here working alongside you every step of the way, fighting for good candidates who have been running in tough years. And I know we can turn this tide. You have my total commitment. It can be done, but it's going to take all of us. And so my ask of each of you, what can I do for you? What can you do for the state of Missouri? My ask of each of you, I'm going to be spending more time and energy on this cycle than I ever have before, and that's saying a lot. But I'm going to ask each of you to do the very same, whether that's organizing and getting folks to the club meeting, whether that's registering voters, letters to the editor, phone calls, canvassing, donating, all of the different things that we do. social networking even. All the different things that we do. My request to each of you is, whether it's for me or anyone else or any other U.S. Senator or any other races can be on the ballot this time, I'm convinced we can turn this around, but it's going to take a better effort than we've ever made before. And so I'm asking for your help with that. And certainly for the campaign, we're on Facebook, scottsifton.com. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, Kent.
You mentioned that in the Missouri Senate, you had filibustered in the past. And I'm wondering what you think about the filibuster in the United States Senate, whether it needs to be left alone, tweaked to make it more painful, or killed.
So it's a very different animal in Washington. As I understand it, all McConnell has to say is, yeah, we're filibustering that one, and that's kind of it. It doesn't really, and nothing really ensues. It's not like the days where, Strom Thurmond was reading from the cookbook to try to stop the Voting Rights Act or the Civil Rights Act. I forget which it was, but from the Civil Rights era with Strom Thurmond cookbook reading on the U.S. Senate floor, that doesn't happen. So in Jefferson's, look, the point of the filibuster is to protect the rights of the minority. It's a tool to be used in Jefferson City to leverage and shape legislation, and that's what it's used for. It is rare, in my view, that the nuclear option is exercised in Jeff City, but it does happen from time to time. It didn't happen nearly as much when Democrats were in control. And in my view, more often than not, the nuclear option of terminating debate is an abuse of the process. But all of that is to say, the way McConnell and Blunt have been using the filibuster, I believe, is an abuse of the process. As it stands now, I don't believe you have the votes to do away with it. Manchin's made that very clear, and I don't think he's alone. So I do think what you're going to see before the 2022 election is, making it a little bit more painful, probably in some way. And look, President Biden's agenda deserves an up or down vote. H.R. 1 needs to come to a vote. PRO Act needs to come to a vote. The George Floyd Justice and Policing Act needs to come to a vote in the United States Senate. If it's going to be used not as a tool to shape legislation, but as merely, in essence, a minority veto to block it altogether, regardless of the process, I have a real problem with that. That's not how we used it in Jefferson City. That's not how it should be used. And I don't think we can allow that to continue.
Thank you.
Anybody? Sue?
It seems to me that we have a lot of trouble getting the rural areas to vote Democratic, and I don't understand why we can't seem to appeal to them more. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, just from an issues standpoint, I'll start with, infrastructure is important. Broadband, particularly in rural areas, is important. The president's infrastructure bill is going to be coming forward, and we'll see how that goes. Hopefully that comes to a vote and passes. And I believe that package is going to include some good infrastructure for rural parts of our state, and hopefully that will all happen. It would be quite a cruel irony if Republicans were to kill the infrastructure bill that would actually help rural areas and to have voters reward them for doing it. I don't think that's how it's going to play out, but we have to be careful. But beyond that, I've fought for local control of land use, agricultural land use in our state. In fact, I went toe-to-toe with Mike Parson on that issue in 2013 on what became the Freedom to Farm Amendment. The last concession that we got out of Parson was protecting local control of agricultural land use. And that deal stood for 6 years, and then he reneged on it as governor. But I don't believe that voters in this state think that Jefferson City should be preempting county and municipal governments on agricultural land use. I don't think that's the case, but I don't think we've gotten that message out like we should. But a lot of the issues in rural areas aren't so different than they are in urban and suburban. It's access to health care. It's access to affordable education. I think that when people see that Biden will accomplish more in 6 months on this pandemic than his predecessor did in a year, I think that will matter to voters. I think that when that happens, you will see the economy unleashed, and I think you're going to see a burst of growth as we sort of come back from the ledge economically, I think that the voters throughout our state are going to take notice of that. So I think it'll be a fundamentally different dynamic in 22 than some of what we've seen with the last president.
Well, my fingers are crossed.
John, I've got a question for you, and it's about taxation. Seems like the upper 10% of the population in either the state of Missouri and especially the United States is treated differently in the taxes that people end up paying. Meaning, from my standpoint, I think they get a lot more benefits than the regular working middle class fella or family. Do you have any thoughts on that?
My knee-jerk reaction to that, Bob, is you should watch very closely Eric Schmidt's candidacy for United States Senate, because there is no person in Missouri state government in the last several years that has done more to create tax breaks for the wealthy in our state than Eric Schmidt, including corporate as well as individual and high earner. Passed a tax break. This pass-through thing that was done, which doubled the price of the tax cut that was passed over Governor Nixon's veto a few years back. This pass-through thing that was done basically is a tax giveaway for lobbyists and lawyers and those ilk. And I don't know that that's where we need to be targeting our tax relief. If you're gonna do something, help the middle class, help the families that are just struggling to raise a family on the wages that they're making. Help those people. We'll see what happens in Washington. There is talk that the infrastructure bill may be 50% paid for by changes to the capital gains and corporate tax rates. We'll see what happens with that. I'm not yet persuaded as to how that's going to go, and as it stands now, I don't know that that's even been formally put on the table. That's just what's being talked about.
Susan, you got anything?
I do have a question for you.
Sure.
So you have a lot of people running against you in the Democrats and a lot in the Republicans. So how are you going to stand out?
We'll see how the field shapes out. I think sadly, as a Democrat, I stand out for the fact that I've been able to win in this last decade, and I've demonstrated that ability. As compared to contrasting a Republican with Republican, I'll say this: if Eric Greitens is the nominee, there are a whole lot of contrasts, including specifically on ethics. And I went after him tooth and nail when he was governor. And not to be partisan about it. If he'd have done a good job, I'm capable of agreeing and giving people that I disagree with credit when I think they're right. But he resigned when a court ordered him to disclose who his donors were. Think about that for a minute. Mm-hmm. All of the other stuff that happened. I mean, if any of you have read the bipartisan House committee report on their investigation into some of the more salacious allegations, read it. You won't forget having read it. There's a reason that the vast majority of Republicans in the House and Senate signed the impeachment inquiry. But that wasn't enough to make him leave. It was when he was told, you're going to have to tell us who's funding you that he suddenly cut the deal. And that's just profoundly disturbing. So yeah, I could easily stand out in that field. I fought for banning lobbyist gifts to legislators. In 10 years, I never took one penny in lobbyist gifts, and the voters ultimately did that through two ballot measures in 2018 and 2020. So I felt vindicated by the voters on that. And I also introduced legislation to require disclosure of what has been heretofore called dark money. So, there's some clear contrasts to be set. And policy-wise within the Democratic field, we'll see. I'm not gonna come out firing shots at this point. There's really no need. It's early. We'll see how the form fields. And at this point, we don't even know who's going to be in ultimately necessarily. So,
Point of information I want to make on this: Greitens actually ran the first time he ran statewide. I think it was for governor. He actually ran as a Democrat.
I don't know about that. He ran as a Republican in 2016. He had previously been a Democrat.
Yes.
He's previously been a Democrat. Yeah, so the 2016 governor's race featured a Democratic nominee who had served as a Republican and a Republican nominee who had attended the DNC in 2008, which was a little odd.
He strikes me as a real chameleon, changing his colors based upon whatever direction he thinks is going to be the best for him.
Well, and I have to say, not to put too fine a point on it, but I don't think he's the only one in politics that might be that way. And
True.
I think that's something else that I stand. And that's actually, thank you, Bob. That gives me a better answer to Susan's question. That is my point. You know who I am. You know what I'll do because you've seen it.
I've had people tell me when I ran for state representative down here in Christian County, they said, well, they like me, but they won't vote for a Democrat. And they tell me, why don't you run as a Republican? And I said, well, I'm like the American flag. I don't change my colors just because it gets a little bit harder going. And then they shut up. Mr. Bramer, being a CPA, former CPA, do you have any questions for Mr. Sifton? Oh, you're muted.
You're muted, Mike. You're muted, Mike.
You're muted.
Unmute, Mike.
Well, Scott, actually, I'm a long-term retired CPA. I don't CPA anymore, so I don't have
I didn't mean that you'd CPA'd anymore. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, we've got.
I even have somebody else do my tax return now, so I got smart in a hurry.
Well, we've got a great CPA that we really need to reelect next year, and Nicole Gaffney is our state.
I agree.
She's fantastic. We need to make sure we keep her.
Chris, coming from California, do you have anything that you want to ask about Missouri politics? Or
Well, I find it very interesting how Roy Blunt, who has always, never missed a photo op behind Mitch McConnell, all of a sudden decided to bail out. This is strange. What do you suppose happened, Scott?
I'm not going to speak for Senator Blunt, but I will say that his announcement last Monday was consistent with and tracked with things that I had heard. And there had been a lot of conflicting intel. And obviously he himself had confirmed that he was running. I think had sent out fundraising emails between the insurrection and his announcement. And so the answer to your question is I really don't know. I was fully ready, willing, and able to take on Senator Blunt if he had run for re-election. But the fact that he is not running isn't the craziest scenario that I could have imagined by any stretch in that regard. But I don't really know, and certainly not going to speak for him.
Well, as a lifetime Californian, picking up and moving here, it's still culture shock for me even after 4 years. But it's everything I expected it to be and less.
It's a wonderful state. I hope that in the very near future that we can get you to finish that sentence with the word more. It's a wonderful state. I've lived here almost my entire life. I went to law school out of state, but made it, was 100% coming back from the minute I left to go to law school. 3 years, spent my summers during law school in Jefferson City. I love this state. I've been lucky enough to be able to travel it and see it for many, many years. My second job in politics was actually advancing Governor Carnahan's bus tour in the 1996 cycle. It was 28 stops in 25 cities in 3 days in August of 1996, and I advanced the entire thing twice. There was actually, I was rolling out of Southwest Missouri. I had one evening where the last appointment of the day was in Springfield, and the first appointment the next morning was in Dexter, and it was just about sunset when I was rolling out of Springfield eastbound, and so it was kind of a late night driving through the Mark Twain National Forest, and somewhere in the dark I heard this thud, like I'd hit something, and I couldn't I couldn't see it, like there, no tire pressure loss, nothing really amiss. It wasn't a deer or anything like that, so I thought nothing of it. And I'm in New Madrid the next morning with one of the local Democratic organizers at the time. And he points out that right in the middle of the grill on my car, centered perfectly, is a bat that apparently what I must have hit in the middle of the night. So I didn't even know I was driving the Batmobile. Very briefly, for Mel Carnahan.
There went your credibility, Chris.
I have one point I want to make, Scott. I've had Blunt as my congressman. I've had Blunt as my senator. I've had Billy Long as my representative. In all the years I've lived here in Southwest Missouri, not one time have they ever had a town hall meeting or even had an effort to talk to the voters. Billy Long will not talk to anybody. Blunt absolutely wouldn't have town hall meetings. There was no give and take. The big problem when you send them text messages or emails or try to talk to them, it's form letters already pre-prepared. You never. I mean, if there's nothing more exacerbating than it's having the lack of communicating with the people that represent you.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of that is simply showing up. Obviously, it's one thing with Zoom and a pandemic, but that was one of Claire McCaskill's strengths. I always thought was she got around and had those conversations. And I'll tell you, don't get me wrong, I'm going to do the people's business in Washington. My goal is going to be to spend as much time in Missouri as I possibly can.
Okay. Well, anybody else have any other questions? Seeing none, I want to thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us. Greatly appreciate it. Can't wait till you get a chance to come down here after this.
Yep.
Zoom is okay, but personal contact is great.
Strongly agree. I had a great time down with you a couple of Christmases ago, and look forward to seeing you again in person soon as it's safe for everybody. Everybody be safe, please.
You too.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Hey,
Thank you,
Scott.
Scott.
Thank you.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
We'll see you later.